In June of 1497, a fisherman on the banks of the Tiber River in Rome saw something snagged in the reeds.
Just a completely normal morning for him, right?
Yeah, totally normal, until he and the authorities pulled it out of the muddy water. They found a man wearing a velvet cloak and like these silver buckled shoes.
Not your average fisherman's catch?
Definitely not. It was the Pope's golden child, the captain general of the papal army. And he had been pierced with 9 stab wounds and his throat was just violently slit.
It's incredibly brutal.
Right. But here's the detail that sent an absolute shockwave through the Renaissance world. His heavy purse, which was overflowing with gold ducats, was still tied to his belt.
Ah, so it wasn't a robbery.
Exactly. This wasn't a mugging gone wrong, it was a message. And as the whispers rapidly spread through, the stone corridors of the Vatican, the prime suspect wasn't a rival kingdom.
Or an invading army.
No. The prime suspect was the victim's own brother.
It is the ultimate historical murder mystery, and it perfectly encapsulates the violent, paranoid, and just fiercely insular world we are stepping into today.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled to have you with us. Today, our mission is to uncover the true mechanisms of power behind history's most infamous dynasty.
The Borgias.
The Borgias, yeah. We're looking directly at how this single, fiercely ambitious family gained absolute power over the Catholic Church.
And how they fought tooth and nail to maintain their legitimacy in a world that fundamentally despised them.
Right. And of course, what ultimately caused their catastrophic, almost unbelievable decline.
To do this, we are synthesizing a really fascinating stack of sources to separate the myth from the mechanics.
Oh, there's a lot of myth.
So much myth. We're looking at Nicholas Ryan Mason's academic thesis, The Borgia Reexamined, which actually throws a massive curveball into the accepted family dynamic.
I can't wait to get to that part.
We're also pulling from detailed entries from encyclopedia.com, comprehensive historical and geopolitical breakdowns from both the English and French Wikipedia pages, and transcripts from the Historica Vita documentary series.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I absolutely love a good story, and the Borgias are the ultimate Renaissance drama.
Oh, without a doubt.
But my goal today isn't just to, gawk at the scandals. I want to strip away the centuries of myth and see these people as they actually were.
Which is to say, ultimate outsiders trying to hack a completely closed, elitist system.
Yes, we're talking about ambition, PR rebranding, and raw survival.
And what's fascinating here is the institutional mechanics of it all. We have to look past the sensationalism.
Right, the rumors of poisonings and extravagant orgies.
Exactly. We have to look past that and examine the geopolitics. How exactly does a minor noble family from Spain cross the Mediterranean, effectively hijack the papacy, and turn it into a secular military nation-state?
It all starts with what I can only describe as a masterclass in corporate rebranding. Let's rewind to the 13th century.
Okay, setting the stage.
The family originates in the Kingdom of Aragon, specifically in the Spanish town of Borgia, which sits near Zaragoza. Right out of the gate, their very name betrays their origins.
The etymology is super interesting here.
It really is. The root of Borgia actually comes from the Arabic word borg, which translates to tower.
Which is incredibly telling. I mean, the Iberian Peninsula during this era was a massive linguistic and cultural melting pot.
Because of the Reconquista, right?
Right. It was defined by centuries of conflict and coexistence between Christian and Islamic powers. So having an Arabic root in your family name was common in that geography.
But not so great if you're trying to take over the Vatican.
Exactly. If your ultimate goal is to conquer the halls of traditional Orthodox Catholic power in Italy, an Arabic surname doesn't exactly project ancient, divinely ordained European royalty.
Definitely not. If you are trying to break into the ultimate country club of the Italian elite, you have to look the part.
So they pivot.
A huge pivot. What do they do when they start accumulating wealth and ambition? Well, they don't just change the spelling to the Italianized Borgia. They launch a massive PR campaign.
A total visual overhaul.
Yeah. They completely changed their family symbol to the Boreas, the bull. They plastered this grazing red bull on a vibrant green field everywhere, on their carriages, their signet rings, their architecture.
It is a brilliant metonymic shift.
Right. They distanced themselves from the Arabic root of a stone tower and aligned themselves with a living, breathing symbol of raw physical power, fertility, and unstoppable dominance.
And the branding exercise didn't stop at the animal either. As they gained institutional traction, Pope Callixtus III, who we will get to in a moment, added an orle.
An orle?
Yeah, it's a border around the family crest. He decorated this border with 8 flames.
Oh, I know this part. The official story released by the family was that these flames honored 8 brave Borgia knights.
Right, knights who valiantly fought alongside King James I of Aragon during the bloody conquest of the Kingdom of Valencia back in 1238.
And to put the cherry on top of this completely manufactured identity, they just flat out fabricated a royal lineage.
They really went all in.
They commissioned genealogies claiming direct descent from a 12th century feudal lord named Pedro de Atares, who was a legitimate claimant to the crown of Aragon.
The only problem with this prestigious ancestry.
Surviving historical documents from Aragon show that Pedro de Atares died completely childless. He had no heirs.
Minor detail, right?
I look at this like a modern social media influencer faking a generational old money aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know, renting sports cars and taking photos in front of mansions they don't own just to get their foot in the door with actual billionaire investors.
Fake it till you make it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They faked it until they became it.
It was incredibly audacious, yes, but we have to view this through the lens of Renaissance survival. Was it bragging? Yes, but it was a necessary armor.
Because they were outsiders.
Right. To understand why they went to such extreme lengths to fabricate this majestic Spanish heritage, you have to understand the fierce, deeply entrenched prejudice they faced the moment they stepped foot in Italy.
The Italians were not welcoming.
Not at all. The established Italian nobility families like the Orsini, the Colonna, the Sforza, they viewed the Spanish, especially the Aragonese and Valencians, with profound xenophobic suspicion.
And their political enemies in Rome immediately weaponized that prejudice. People like Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who becomes the ultimate antagonist in the Borgia story.
Oh, absolutely. The arch nemesis.
He actively spread vicious, targeted rumors that the Borgias were Marranos.
And we should clarify this historical context for the listener. Marranos was a deeply derogatory term used at the time for Jewish people in Spain and Portugal who had converted to Catholicism.
Often under extreme duress, right?
Yes. Sometimes these conversions were genuine, but often they were forced under threat of exile or death by the Inquisition. The accusation wrapped up in the slur was that these converts were secretly still practicing Judaism in the shadows.
Right. And it is crucial to state clearly that as we analyze these sources, we are looking at this purely as impartial observers of history. The historical record, as agreed upon by all the encyclopedic sources we're using, shows zero evidence that the Borgias were actually of Jewish descent. And obviously, even if they were, it wouldn't matter to their intrinsic value as human beings.
Of course not.
But the fact that their enemies used this specific claim as a political weapon speaks volumes about the bigotry of the 15th century.
Precisely. Accusing a rising power player in the Vatican of being a false Catholic was a calculated, lethal way to delegitimize their authority.
It's character assassination.
It was a targeted smear campaign designed to paint the Borgias not just as foreigners, but as dangerous, pious frauds who were infiltrating the Holy See to destroy it from within.
Giuliano della Rovere wasn't making a theological critique. He was executing a political assassination of their character.
Which makes their actual institutional climb even more astonishing. They were swimming in a political ocean where all the apex predators wanted them dead.
And they were already bleeding from these rumors.
Exactly. The man who first navigates them out of this dangerous water and onto dry land is Alfons de Borja. He is the true architect of the dynasty.
Alfons is so fascinating to me because he totally defies the stereotype of the Renaissance conqueror.
How so?
Well, born in 1378 in Sativa, in the Kingdom of Valencia, he doesn't start his career with a sword in his hand. He starts with a book.
Right. He is an academic.
He rises to become a prominent professor of law at the University of Lleida.
He's a legal scholar navigating a world of warlords. So how does a law professor end up taking over the Vatican?
By being the smartest person in the room when kings needed their problem solved. Yeah. His razor-sharp legal mind caught the attention of King Alfonso V of Aragon.
A powerful guy to have in your corner.
Definitely. The king pulled Alphonse out of academia and made him a royal diplomat. And during this era, the politics between the Spanish kingdoms and the Italian states were insanely complex.
A total minefield.
Yeah. When King Alfonso sought to secure his contested claim over the Kingdom of Naples, he hit a roadblock. Naples was technically a fiefdom under the ultimate suzerainty of the Pope.
Meaning, the Pope had the final legal say on who ruled it.
Exactly. The king sent his absolute best negotiator, Alfons de Borja, to mediate with Pope Eugene IV.
And Alphonse is so incredibly effective at his job, so masterful in his mediation and legal arguments, that Pope Eugene basically poaches him from the King of Aragon.
Which is a huge flex.
It is. In 1444, as a reward for resolving this massive geopolitical crisis, the Pope elevates Alphonse to the rank of cardinal.
This is the critical pivot in our story. We have to understand the Catholic Church in this era not just as a religious institution, but as a vast multinational corporation.
And a primary vehicle for alternative wealth.
Right. If you were a noble family without massive continent-spanning estates to pass down to all your children, placing your family members into the ecclesiastical hierarchy was a pathway to immense wealth, land, and geopolitical influence.
Alphonse hacked the system perfectly. He played the long game. He built an impeccable reputation for integrity, austere living, and diplomatic genius.
He basically just outlasted everyone.
He really did. He bided his time through the reigns of multiple popes. Finally, in 1455, at the advanced age of 77, the fractured Italian factions in the papal conclave couldn't agree on a candidate.
So they picked the old guy.
Exactly. They elected Alphonse as a compromise, assuming he would be a weak, easily controlled placeholder who would die quickly. He took the name Pope Callixtus III.
77 years old. The Italian cardinals thought they were buying time, but they severely underestimated the man.
They absolutely did. His papacy was brief, lasting only 3 years, from 1455 to 1458, but it was incredibly consequential. You have to remember the geopolitical terror of the moment.
The fall of Constantinople.
Yes. Just 2 years prior, in 1453, Constantinople had fallen to the Ottoman Empire. This event sent shockwaves of existential panic through Christian Europe.
I can imagine.
Callixtus III dedicated almost the entirety of his papacy to organizing a massive unified crusade to push back the Ottoman Turks. He liquidated papal assets, sold off art, and built a fleet.
Did it work?
Well, he failed to get the cynical European monarchs to actually cooperate. Even his old boss, the King of Aragon, refused to send troops. But this effort firmly established the Borgias as major players on the global geopolitical stage.
He also formally annulled the heresy conviction of Joan of Arc in 1456, completely rehabilitating her legacy.
Which is a massive historical footnote.
It really shows his legalistic mind at work. He was cleaning up the Church's past mistakes, but the most important thing he did for the future of our story, he threw the heavy bronze doors of the Vatican wide open for his family.
He definitely changed the rules of the game to ensure the Borgias wouldn't lose their foothold when he died.
He institutionalized nepotism. And we use that word today to mean unfair favoritism, but it comes from the literal Latin word nepos, meaning nephew.
Right. For Callixtus, elevating his nephews wasn't just about enriching his family. It was a security measure.
Because everyone wanted him dead.
Pretty much. When you are a Spanish pope surrounded by hostile Italian cardinals who want you gone, you need lieutenants you can trust with your life. Callixtus elevated 2 of his nephews to the cardinalate. One was Luis Juan de Mila.
And the other.
The other was a 25-year-old named Rodrigo Borgia.
Enter the main character of the Renaissance, Rodrigo Borgia, the man who will eventually become Pope Alexander VI, the ultimate villain in popular culture.
And Callixtus doesn't just make him a cardinal at 25. Shortly after, he appoints him vice-chancellor of the Holy Roman Church.
The vice-chancellorship is a position whose power is hard to overstate. It is essentially the chief administrative officer, the chief operating officer of the entire Catholic Church.
The COO of the Vatican.
Exactly. The vice-chancellor controls the vast papal bureaucracy, the endless stream of global correspondence, the appointment of bishops, and crucially, a massive amount of the Church's revenue streams.
It is the most powerful and lucrative position below the Pope himself.
And Rodrigo doesn't just hold this job for a few years as a favor from his uncle. He holds it for 35 years.
That's some credible survival skills.
He survives the reigns of 4 different popes, many of whom hated his family. And this is where I have to push back hard on the popular melodramatic narrative.
Okay, let's hear it.
Pop culture, the television shows, the historical fiction, paints Rodrigo Borgia as this pure usurper, an unqualified thug who just bought the papacy in 1492 with bribes and brute force.
That is the stereotype.
But think about this logically. If you serve as the chief operating officer of a global multinational corporation for 3.5 decades, knowing where every single body is buried, managing every diplomatic crisis, balancing the books, aren't you objectively the most qualified person on earth for the CEO job?
It's an excellent grounded perspective. You do not survive 35 years in the Vatican Curia. the cutthroat central government of the church, surrounded by hostile Italian families plotting your downfall without being a geopolitical savant.
You'd be dead in a week.
Exactly. Rodrigo was charming, incredibly hardworking, and devastatingly pragmatic. When he finally secures the papacy in the famous conclave of 1492, taking the name Alexander VI, he isn't a novice learning the ropes.
He is the institution.
He understands its levers of power better than any man alive.
And 1492 is a watershed year in human history. Columbus sails across the Atlantic, the Reconquista ends with the fall of Granada in Spain, and Rodrigo Borgia becomes pope.
The world is shifting under everyone's feet.
And Alexander VI is standing at the epicenter. We think of popes today as giving sermons and managing theology, but Alexander was operating like a wartime president. He treated the papal states not just as a spiritual domain, but as a secular sovereign nation state that needed to be defended and expanded.
His mastery of statecraft was tested almost immediately. In 1494, King Charles VIII of France marched a massive, highly advanced army down the Italian peninsula to lay claim to the Kingdom of Naples.
And Rome is right in the middle of that path.
Yes. To get to Naples, the French army had to pass directly through Rome. This was an existential military threat. Most leaders in Alexander's position would have either fled the city in terror or ordered a doomed military defense that would have seen Rome sacked and burned to the ground.
Like it would be a few decades later. So how did he outmaneuver the King of France? Because he didn't have an army big enough to stop him.
He used pure, calculated diplomacy. Alexander utilized the geography of Rome to his advantage, pulling his forces back into the impregnable fortress of Castel Sant'Angelo.
Smart move.
Very. From that position of safety, he opened negotiations with Charles VIII. He didn't offer a battle, he offered strategic concessions. He granted the French army safe passage through the city, provided them with provisions, and even offered his own son, Cesare, as a temporary diplomatic hostage to guarantee his goodwill.
Wow, offering his son as collateral.
But crucially, he never actually endorsed Charles's claim to Naples. He stalled, he flattered, and he managed to get a massive hostile army to walk straight through his capital city without unsheathing a single sword.
It was a masterpiece of crisis management.
And his influence stretched far beyond the Italian peninsula. He wasn't just managing local warlords.
Not at all. In 1493, reacting to Columbus's discoveries, Alexander issued the famous papal bull Inter Cetera.
The line on the map.
He literally drew a longitudinal line down a map of the globe, dividing the newly discovered non-Christian lands of the Americas between the Catholic monarchs of Spain and Portugal.
He was acting as the supreme geopolitical arbiter of the known world, dictating global imperialism with the stroke of a pen.
Okay, so we have a master politician, a global arbiter, and a notoriously busy family man.
Here we go.
This is where the historical record usually pivots to the scandals, and it's where the Borgias really earn their infamous reputation. Mistresses, illegitimate children, whispered orgies.
The juicy stuff.
The accepted history, backed up by all the encyclopedic sources and contemporary diaries, states that Rodrigo maintained a long-term illicit relationship with a married noblewoman named Vannozza de Catanei. And with her, he fathered 4 historically seismic children: Giovanni, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey.
He also later had a daughter with a much younger mistress, Giulia Farnese.
Right. And that is the overwhelming consensus view. And what shocked his contemporaries wasn't necessarily that a cardinal or a pope had a mistress.
That hypocrisy was actually quite common.
What genuinely horrified the Renaissance establishment was that Alexander openly acknowledged his illegitimate children, brought them into the Vatican, and systematically enriched them with church lands and titles. He flaunted them.
But wait, here's where the sources get incredibly interesting and where we have to bring in Nicholas Ryan Mason's thesis, the Borgia Reexamined.
Oh, I've been waiting for this.
Mason throws a massive wrench into this accepted narrative. He argues, based on a meticulous re-examination of legal court documents, property deeds, and contemporary memoirs, that these famous Borgia children were not biological.
Which is wild to think about.
He claims they were legally adopted by Rodrigo Borgia and were likely the children of a deceased relative.
It is a highly provocative thesis that attempts to reframe the entire moral framework of Rodrigo's papacy. But think about the sheer brilliance of it if it's true.
It would be quite a loophole.
Imagine you are a supposedly celibate church leader. You desperately need heirs to secure your political dynasty. You need generals to command your armies. You need daughters to marry off to foreign kings to seal treaties. But you can't biologically father them without giving your enemies infinite ammunition.
So what do?
You use a legal loophole. I look at this like the ancient Roman emperors. Julius Caesar legally adopted his great-nephew Octavian to make him his heir. Emperor Trajan adopted Hadrian. They adopted highly capable individuals to ensure a smooth, secure succession of power.
It's a very Roman move.
What if Rodrigo Borgia was just using an ancient, legally ironclad Roman playbook to establish a dynasty without technically breaking his vow of chastity?
I hear your analogy, and viewing it as a strategic Roman succession play is a highly creative way to analyze the power dynamics. However, I have to respectfully push back on Mason's conclusion here.
Fair enough. Let's hear the counterargument.
When we look at the overwhelming weight of the broader historical consensus, the adoption theory just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The encyclopedic sources, the vast majority of historical literature, and crucially, the intimate letters written between Rodrigo, Venosa, and the children themselves explicitly point to a biological reality.
The letters are pretty damning.
Very. Venosa's own correspondence references her maternal bond in ways that far exceed legal wardship. Furthermore, the adoption theory requires us to completely dismiss the immense volume of contemporary testimony from their enemies, who specifically targeted the biological illegitimacy of the children as a primary point of attack.
But I'd argue that's exactly why the sources are muddy. If you're Giuliano del Rovere, you want these kids to be biological bastards.
Because it's better PR for the opposition.
Exactly. A legal adoption of a nephew is boring. A biological bastard born of a pope's mistress is a scandal you can use to wage a propaganda war. The enemies had every incentive to ignore a legal adoption and claim biology.
That is a fair point regarding propaganda. The Borgia's enemies never missed an opportunity to amplify a scandal. But even if we concede that the historical waters are muddy, let's look at the ultimate function of these children. Does the biological distinction actually matter to the trajectory of history?
Probably not to the people they conquered.
Right. Whether they were biological offspring born of Venosa or legally adopted wards brought in from Spain, the utility of these children to Pope Alexander was exactly the same. They were not just family, they were geopolitical tools. They were highly mobilized chess pieces on the bloody board of Italian politics.
And some of those chess pieces were incredibly violent. Which brings us to the first major turning point in the Borgia saga, the pivot from purely institutional diplomatic church power to raw, unapologetic military dominance.
Alexander realized that treaties only last as long as the paper they are written on. He needed a sword.
And initially that sword was his eldest son, Giovanni Borgia.
Giovanni was positioned to be the secular prince of the family. Rodrigo made him the second Duke of Gandia in Spain, and more importantly, appointed him Captain General of the Papal Army.
So he was a muscle.
He was the military muscle meant to enforce the Pope's will.
But Giovanni was arrogant, reckless, and deeply unpopular. Which leads us back to the murder we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The body in the Tiber.
Right. In June 1497, after a night of heavy dining and partying in Rome, Giovanni rides off into the dark with a masked man. A few days later, he is the corpse floating in the Tiber with 9 stab wounds. The gold is untouched.
The message is clear. Someone wanted to cripple the Borgia military apparatus.
And the swirling rumor, the rumor that has survived for over 5 centuries, is that his own brother, Cesare Borgia, ordered the assassination.
The historical evidence linking Cesare to the murder is circumstantial, heavily fueled by the anti-Borgia propaganda machine. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at cui bono, who benefits.
Cesare definitely benefits.
Massively. The death of Giovanni creates a massive vacuum in the family's power structure, a vacuum that Cesare was uniquely, almost terrifyingly suited to fill. At the time of Giovanni's death, Cesare was an ordained cardinal.
Wearing the red hat.
Right. He had been pushed into the ecclesiastical track by his father to manage the church bureaucracy. He had studied law and humanities at the University of Perugia and theology at the University of Pisa. He possessed a brilliant, calculating mind.
But he was trapped.
He was trapped wearing the red hat of a churchman, while his less competent brother got to wear the armor and command the armies.
And it is blatantly obvious from every historical account that Cesare absolutely hated the red hat. He did not want to be a priest.
He despised it. Giovanni's sudden death cleared the path. In a virtually unprecedented move that shocked the Vatican, Cesare formally petitioned the Pope to be laicized, to renounce his cardinalate and return to secular life.
Did Alexander push back?
Not really. Alexander, needing a new military commander, granted it. Cesare took off the religious robes and immediately stepped into his dead brother's role as a condottiero, a mercenary military leader.
And the tragic irony for Italy is that Cesare was terrifyingly good at it, far better than Giovanni ever was.
Cesare launched a series of ruthless, lightning-fast military campaigns to conquer the Romagna.
What was the Romagna like at that point?
The Romagna was a large region in central Italy that was nominally under papal control, but in reality it was ruled by a fractured network of rebellious, deeply entrenched local lords and tyrants.
So Caesar's job was to clean house.
Cesare's mandate from his father was to bring them to heel, but Cesare didn't just defeat them in standard battles, he crushed them completely.
Explain how he fought, because Renaissance warfare was often very theatrical, right? Mercenary captains didn't actually want to kill each other's expensive soldiers.
Exactly. Traditional condottieri warfare was often a slow game of maneuver, sieges, and negotiated surrenders. It was a business. Cesare fundamentally changed the rules of engagement. He utilized overwhelming speed, moving his troops faster than anyone anticipated.
Shock and all.
And he employed devastating psychological warfare. When he besieged a city like Forlì or Faenza, he made it clear that resistance meant annihilation. He broke treaties when it suited him. He assassinated rival captains at negotiating tables.
Like at Senegal.
Most famously at Senegalia, where he invited rival mercenaries to a banquet and had them strangled. His ultimate goal wasn't just to win battles. It was to carve out a permanent, centralized, secular Borgia state in central Italy that would survive long after his father's papacy ended.
And to fund this war machine, he needed allies.
Yeah.
He couldn't just rely on Vatican coffers. So he secures a vital alliance by marrying the French princess Charlotte d'Albret.
Yes, securing French military backing, specifically access to French cavalry and artillery, was the crucial engine of his early successes. Cesare's methodology was so breathtakingly effective and so completely devoid of traditional Christian moral constraints that he caught the attention of a minor Florentine diplomat who was observing his campaigns.
Niccolò Machiavelli.
Exactly. That diplomat was Niccolò Machiavelli. Cesare Borgia became the primary real-world inspiration for Machiavelli's seminal philosophical work on statecraft, The Prince. Machiavelli watched Cesare systematically destroy his enemies and concluded, though in the ruthless reality of politics, it is safer for a ruler to be feared than to be loved.
The ultimate Machiavellian prince.
Cesare was the ultimate manifestation of maintaining power through calculated force and terror.
But while Cesare is out in the Romagna building a state with blood and iron back in Rome, the PR nightmare for the family is reaching an absolute fever pitch. We have to talk about the scandals, because you can't discuss the Borgias without discussing the infamous banquet of chestnuts in 1501.
This event is the epicenter of the Borgia Black legend, and it is one of those historical moments where separating actual fact from weaponized propaganda is incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
The story comes directly from the diary of Johann Burchard. And Burchard wasn't some distant gossiper. He was the papal master of ceremonies. He managed the daily events in the Vatican. He was a guy who was literally in the room.
An eyewitness account, allegedly.
According to his diary entries, on All Saints' Eve in 1501, Cesare hosted a banquet in his apartments within the Apostolic Palace. After the lavish meal, 50 high-class Roman courtesans were brought into the hall.
And it gets wild from here.
The candelabras were taken off the tables and placed on the floor. Chestnuts were scattered among the candles, and the courtesans were instructed to crawl naked on the floor to pick up the chestnuts, while Pope Alexander, Cesare, and supposedly even Lucrezia watched.
Just unbelievable decadence.
Then, according to Burchard, silk tunics and expensive shoes were offered as prizes to the guests who could perform the most public sexual acts with the courtesans.
It reads like a decadent, apocalyptic fever dream designed to perfectly horrify a Catholic audience.
I want you, the listener, to just imagine the sheer, unadulterated shock of this story hitting the cobblestone streets of Renaissance Rome and filtering up to Florence and Venice. If you are sitting in a tavern hearing this, you aren't fact-checking Johann Burchard's diary.
No, you're just horrified.
You are terrified that the Antichrist is sitting on the papal throne. Even if the details were wildly exaggerated, which they likely were, the fact that the papal master of ceremonies felt compelled to write it down tells you everything you need to know about the toxic atmosphere surrounding the Vatican.
This kind of behavior, real or perceived, was absolute red meat for their political and religious critics.
Most notably, the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola.
Savonarola was a charismatic zealot operating in Florence, and he was preaching literal fire and brimstone against the corruption of the Borgia papacy. He was weaponizing these exact rumors to turn the public against Alexander.
They made it easy for him, didn't they?
The Borgias, through their arrogance and lack of discretion, were handing their enemies all the ammunition required to paint them as apocalyptic monsters.
And speaking of being painted as a monster, no one in this family has been more thoroughly demonized by the pen of history than Lucrezia Borgia. While Caesar was conquering territories with a sword, Alexander realized he needed a softer, more insidious weapon to secure his political borders. Which brings us to the daughter.
If Cesare was the sword that cut down enemies, Lucrezia was the seal on the treaty that bound allies. She was, tragically, a human bargaining chip, moved around the geopolitical board of Italy to secure whatever alliance her father and brother desperately needed at that exact moment.
I look at Lucrezia's life, especially her early life, and I don't see a political mastermind. I see a currency. Her marriages were an exchange rate that fluctuated violently based on papal foreign policy.
It was constant whiplash.
Let's look at the sheer whiplash she experienced. Before she was even 13 years old, she was engaged and disengaged to two different Spanish princes.
Just awful.
But when her father becomes pope in 1492, suddenly Spanish alliances aren't enough. He needs Italian muscle to protect Rome. So, at 13, the Spanish engagements are broken, and she is married off to Giovanni Sforza, a nobleman who links the Borgias to the incredibly powerful military faction in Milan.
But geopolitical needs shift incredibly rapidly in Renaissance Italy. A few years later, the political winds change. Alexander aligns himself with the King of Naples, and suddenly, the Milanese-Sforza alliance is not just useless, it's a political liability.
So they need her back.
He needs Lucrezia single again so he can spend her on a new alliance.
But they are legally married in the eyes of the church. You can't just get a divorce in 1497. So what does the Pope do? He applies the most brutal, humiliating pressure imaginable.
The annulment process.
He forces Giovanni Sforza to sign a public, sworn legal document admitting that he is sexually impotent and that his marriage to Lucrezia was never consummated. This is the only legal ground for annulment.
Sforza is absolutely furious and deeply humiliated.
He signs it to save his own life. But as he leaves Rome, he starts spreading a vicious, retaliatory rumor. He claims the real reason the Pope wanted Lucrezia's marriage annulled is so that the Pope and Cesare can have her for themselves.
The incest rumor.
The infamous incest rumors that define Lucrezia's historical image were not born from observed facts. They were born out of a bitter, humiliated man's divorce revenge.
It was a devastatingly effective piece of slander. With Sforza gone, Lucrezia is rapidly married to a wealthy, handsome young prince named Alfonso of Aragon, securing the vital alliance with Naples. By all historical accounts, Lucrezia genuinely loved Alfonso. They were happy they had a child together.
But then the currency exchange rate changes again. Cesare Borgia pivots his military strategy. He desperately needs an alliance with the King of France to fund his conquests in the Romagna. The problem: France is at war with Naples.
So now the beloved husband is in the way.
Suddenly, Lucrezia's beloved husband, a prince of Naples, is an obstacle to Duchess's ambition. One afternoon in Rome, Alfonso is attacked by a group of masked assassins on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. He is stabbed multiple times, but he miraculously survives.
Barely.
He is carried back to his quarters in the Vatican, bleeding profusely. For an entire month, Lucrezia refuses to leave his side. She cooks his food herself to prevent poisoning. She stations her own guards at the door. She is desperately trying to keep her husband alive inside her own family's home.
And her efforts were ultimately futile. Once Alfonso had regained enough strength to sit up, Lucrezia was briefly called away from the room.
A setup, obviously.
In that tiny window of opportunity, Micheletto Corella, Cesare's chief executioner and most trusted lieutenant, entered Alfonso's quarters and strangled him to death in his bed.
It is pure, chilling mafia methodology. Can you imagine the profound psychological trauma of that reality? Knowing with absolute certainty that your own brother ordered the hit on your husband while you were nursing him, and that your father, the Pope, allowed it to happen.
The paranoia she must have felt.
And the trauma just keeps compounding because the bodies just keep piling up around her. Remember Pedro Calderón, the young Spanish chamberlain known as Peroto?
Yes.
Rumors were flying around the Vatican that he and Lucrezia were having an affair. In February 1498, Peroto's body, along with the body of one of Lucrezia's favorite ladies-in-waiting, is fished out of the Tiber River.
The historical consensus strongly suggests this was another murder ordered by Cesare, not necessarily out of jealousy, but out of brutal pragmatism. He was in the middle of negotiating Lucrezia's next high-stakes marriage, and any scandal regarding her chastity or behavior could derail the treaty. Perodo was a loose end, so Cesare cut it.
And around this exact same time, a mysterious child is born in the Vatican, a boy named Giovanni Borgia, known to history as the Infans Romanus, the child of Rome. The paperwork surrounding this child is mind-boggling.
Completely contradictory.
First, a secret papal bull is issued, claiming the child is Caesare's illegitimate son from a brief affair. Then a second, overlapping papal bull is issued, declaring that the child is actually Pope Alexander's son.
It's chaos.
And meanwhile, the streets of Rome are whispering that the child is actually Lucrezia's, born of incest with either her father or brother, and that Perodo was killed to cover it up. Centuries later, writers like Victor Hugo took these overlapping rumors and wrote plays portraying Lucrezia as a cackling, incestuous, poison ring-wearing femme fatale.
Which is so unfair to her actual legacy.
But when you look at the actual timeline of her life, you have to ask, was she ever a monster? Or was she just a deeply traumatized, terrified young woman trapped in the relentless ambitions of a sociopathic family?
The empirical historical evidence heavily points to the latter. She was a survivor, and her salvation, her ultimate historical triumph, only came when she finally managed to escape the toxic gravity of Rome.
The third marriage.
Her third and final marriage was orchestrated to ally the Borgias with one of the oldest, most prestigious families in Italy, the Este family, who ruled the Duchy of Ferrara. She was to marry Alfonso I d'Este.
And the Este family is old money. They are established, arrogant Italian royalty. They look down their noses in absolute disgust at the nouveau riche, scandalous, upstart Spanish Borgias. They didn't want Lucrezia in their bloodline.
They vehemently opposed it at first, yes. But the dowry Pope Alexander offered was staggering. An astronomical sum of gold, jewels, and crucial territories. The Duke of Ferrara couldn't refuse the money.
Money talks.
Lucrezia moved north to Ferrara, and this is where her narrative completely shifts. Away from the suffocating control of her father and the terrifying presence of Cesare, she finally flourished. She proved to be an incredibly competent, intelligent governor. Yes. When her husband was away fighting in various wars, he left Lucrezia in charge of running the duchy, which she did with remarkable administrative skill. She survived incredibly difficult pregnancies, suffering multiple miscarriages and stillbirths, but she ultimately managed to secure the Este succession. Furthermore, she became one of the most prominent and generous patrons of the arts and literature in all of Renaissance Italy, surrounding herself with renowned poets, scholars, and humanist thinkers.
She effectively rehabilitated her own image through sheer competence, grace, and cultural influence. She didn't rely on papal armies. She built soft power.
Precisely. She established her own political and cultural legitimacy entirely independent of the papacy or Cesare's military terror. She won over the hostile people of Ferrara. By the time she died in 1519, tragically just days after complications from childbirth at the age of 39, she was widely respected, deeply mourned by her subjects, and celebrated as a model Renaissance duchess.
It's the one semi-happy, or at least peaceful, ending in this entire bloody saga. Because for the rest of the Borgia men, the crash is spectacular, rapid, and absolute. Which brings us to the second major turning point of our deep dive, the sudden, catastrophic decline of the Borgia Empire.
It all unravels in August of 1503. Pope Alexander and Cesare both attend a banquet hosted by a wealthy cardinal at a villa outside Rome. A few days later, both the Pope and Cesare fall violently ill with a raging fever and severe vomiting.
The rumors naturally instantly claim that the Borgias accidentally drank poisoned wine they had prepared to murder their wealthy host in order to seize his estate. It's the ultimate poetic justice narrative.
It is a deeply compelling myth, and it fits perfectly into the Black Legend, but historians and epidemiologists generally agree it was an outbreak of severe malaria. Rome was surrounded by marshes, and late summer was notoriously deadly for mosquito-borne illnesses.
Malaria makes more sense.
Regardless of the biological cause, the political outcome was definitive. Cesare, being 28 years old with a robust physical constitution, survived the illness, though he was completely bedridden and incapacitated for months. Alexander, however, was 72 years old. His body couldn't fight it off. He died.
And this is where the fragility of their entire system is exposed.
Yeah.
The absolute moment the Pope stops breathing, the massive, terrifying Borgia Empire instantly begins to vaporize.
This raises an important question regarding institutional power. Why did a state built on overwhelming military dominance and massive wealth collapse practically overnight?
It's a great question.
The answer lies in the mechanics of the papal transition and Cesare's fatal political miscalculations during the ensuing conclave. Cesare's entire power structure, his troops, his treaties, his legal right to rule the Romagna, was entirely dependent on papal authority. He needed a new pope who would validate his conquests and allow him to keep his titles.
Did he get one?
Initially, he managed to muscle the conclave into electing a compromise candidate, Pius III, who was highly favorable to the Borgias. But in a twist of historically disastrous luck, Pius III died after just 26 days in office.
You can almost hear Cesare panicking.
It was an absolute disaster. Faced with a second, highly contentious papal conclave just weeks later, and still physically weakened from his illness, Cesare grew desperate. He knew he didn't have the leverage to force another puppet candidate.
So what's his play?
He made a deal with the devil. He threw the political weight of the Spanish bloc of cardinals, which he still controlled, behind his father's oldest, most bitter, and most cunning enemy, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere.
The exact same guy who started the Marranos rumors decades ago, the guy who spent his entire life trying to destroy the Borgias. Why on earth would Cesare, who trusted no one, trust this man with his life and his empire?
Because Giuliano della Rovere was a master political manipulator. He met with Cesare privately and promised him the world. He swore that if Cesare delivered the votes necessary to secure the papacy, Cesare would be allowed to keep his mercenary armies, his titles as Duke of Valentinois and Romagna, and all his conquered lands.
He promised a partnership.
Right. Sarah, or perhaps clouded by desperation or arrogance, believed he could control della Rovere. He delivered the votes. Giuliano della Rovere was elected and became Pope Julius II.
And Julius II immediately betrayed him. He didn't even wait for the ink to dry.
Instantly. Julius despised the Borgias with a visceral passion. His first act as pope was to declare that he would not live in the same rooms as Alexander, calling him a Moor and a Jew who had desecrated the church. Once Julius securely had the papal tiara on his head, the promises evaporated.
He just took it all away.
He systematically stripped Cesare of his military command, demanded he immediately hand over all the fortresses he had conquered in the Romagna, and when Cesare hesitated, Julius had him arrested and thrown into the deepest dungeons of Castel San Angelo.
I look at Cesare in this moment like a Nepo baby CEO in a modern corporate drama. He spent years strutting around, acting like a self-made military genius, terrifying the board of directors. But the moment the founder, his father, dies and the unlimited papal bank account is closed, the kid realizes he doesn't actually have any real leverage.
That's exactly it.
He didn't build an independent institution, he just violently rented his father's power.
You're touching on exactly what Machiavelli observed in his post-mortem of Cesare's career. Machiavelli deeply admired Cesare's ruthless methods and his vision for a unified state. But his ultimate fatal critique of Cesare and the prince was precisely this lack of independent foundation.
The power was borrowed.
Cesare's immense power was built entirely on the sand of his father's position and wealth. Machiavelli argued that a true prince must build his own foundations. When Alexander was removed unexpectedly, the entire edifice crumbled because Cesare hadn't established enough independent roots, loyalties, or institutional safeguards to survive the transition of papal power.
Cesare's end is almost cinematic in its sheer grinding desperation. The mighty duke, reduced to a fugitive, he manages to escape prison in Italy, flees south to Naples seeking refuge, but is immediately arrested there by the Spanish King Ferdinand, who wants to stay on the new pope's good side.
So he's shipped off again.
Cesare is chained up, put on a boat, and sent to a grim, high-security prison castle in Spain. Incredibly, he escapes again by seducing a servant, getting a rope, and rappelling down the massive stone tower walls in the dead of night, breaking his hand in the process. He eventually makes his way on horseback, in disguise, to the tiny kingdom of Navarre, where his brother-in-law, King John III, takes him in out of pity.
The terror of Italy is reduced to serving as a basic mercenary captain for a minor king fighting a petty local rebellion. It is a staggering fall from grace.
It really is.
In 1507, during the siege of Viana Castle in Navarre, Cesare is tasked with defending the town against a rebellion led by a knight named Louis de Beaumont.
The castle was heavily fortified. It was raining, the middle of a brutal storm. Cesare, furious, humiliated by his fall, and desperate to prove to the world that he was still the legendary, unstoppable commander he once was, spotted enemy knights moving in the distance. He ordered a charge.
And no one followed him.
Right. He rode furiously ahead of his men, shouting his battle cry. But his men, perhaps confused by the storm or lacking loyalty to this foreign captain, didn't follow him. Cesare rode completely alone into an enemy ambush. He was surrounded by Beaumont's knights, pulled violently from his horse, and stabbed to death in the mud.
Such a brutal end.
He was only 31 years old. The man who had kings trembling in their boots, who nearly conquered all of Italy, was stripped of his armor and fine clothes and left completely naked and bleeding in a muddy ditch.
A remarkably dramatic, violent end to a life entirely defined by drama and violence.
So what does this all mean? When the dust settles and the blood washes away, we are left with the long, complicated shadow of the Borgias. How do we measure their legacy? We have to grapple with the Black Legend. How much of the poisoning, the incest, the insatiable greed was real historical fact, and how much of it was just brilliant, weaponized propaganda written by the people who defeated them?
It is the ultimate testament to the adage that history is written by the victors. And the Borgias lost comprehensively. Pope Julius II and the subsequent popes had a massive vested institutional interest in portraying Alexander not just as a bad pope, but as an anomaly of pure, unprecedented evil.
They needed a scapegoat.
By tainting the Borgias as demonic infiltrators, the institution of the papacy could distance itself from his actions and justify their own reigns. The Black Legend that survives today is a complex mixture of their undeniable, brazen moral corruption, layered with highly exaggerated xenophobic political slander designed to erase their very real political achievements.
But history loves irony. Because out of the ashes of this deeply corrupted Black Legend emerges one of the most bizarre, fascinating legacy twists I've ever encountered in history. We have to talk about Francisco Borgia.
Francisco Borgia represents the ultimate paradox of the family line. He was the direct great-grandson of Pope Alexander VI, born in Spain in 1510, just a few years after Cesare died in that ditch.
So he grows up in luxury.
He grew up in the highest, most privileged echelons of Spanish nobility. He served directly at the imperial court of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. He inherited the family title, becoming the fourth Duke of Gandia. He married a beautiful noblewoman, had 8 children, and lived the opulent, powerful life of a true Renaissance prince.
He was a true Borgia, enjoying the wealth and status that his ancestors had killed and schemed to secure.
But then, profound personal tragedy struck. His beloved wife passed away, and in the wake of her death, Francisco experienced a massive, life-altering spiritual awakening. He realized the emptiness of secular power.
A complete 180.
He formally renounced all his earthly titles, gave away his immense wealth, and joined a newly formed, rigorous religious order known as the Society of Jesus the Jesuits.
And because he has that inherent Borgia competence, he doesn't just quietly join and sweep the floors. He applies his administrative genius to religion. He rises rapidly through the ranks, utilizing his political connections, and becomes the 3rd superior general of the entire Jesuit order.
He is instrumental in expanding their global missionary work, founding colleges, and shaping the Catholic Counter-Reformation.
He lived a life of such intense piety and dedication that in 1670, Pope Clement X formally canonized him. Let that sink in. The direct descendant, the great-grandson of the most infamous, corrupt, widely hated pope in the history of the Catholic Church, becomes St. Francis Borgia.
It is an astonishing, multi-generational arc of redemption for the family name. It proves that the family's drive for excellence could be channeled into spiritual pursuits just as effectively as political ones. And the lineage didn't stop there.
They kept going.
The Borgia descendants continued to wield significant global power, but they learned from Cesare's mistakes. They operated firmly within established institutional frameworks rather than trying to subvert or conquer them. For example, Francisco de Borja Aragon served as the powerful viceroy of Peru in the early 17th century, managing a massive colonial empire. We even see the legacy stretch all the way into modern times, with Rodrigo Borgia serving as the democratically elected president of the Republic of Ecuador from 1988 to 1992.
It is genuinely wild to trace that bloodline. I want you to sit with that for a second. Think about the mechanics of public relations, branding, and legacy. The Borgias started as outsiders from Spain, who changed their name to a bull just to look tough enough to survive.
Then they were viciously smeared as false Catholics by bigots, so they hacked the system and literally took over the highest seat of the Catholic Church.
Right. They were painted as incestuous, poisoning monsters by their political enemies. And centuries later, we still have movies, TV shows, and video games focusing almost entirely on how evil they were. But that exact same family also produced globally effective governors, patrons of high art, modern presidents, and a literal Catholic saint.
It profoundly illustrates how multifaceted and contradictory historical legacies truly are when you strip away the simplified narratives of saints and sinners.
So, to summarize this incredibly rapid, violent trajectory, the Borgias were a minor Spanish noble family who realized they were locked out of traditional power. They masterfully rebranded themselves, utilized the ecclesiastical ladder of the church as a genius alternative to traditional land inheritance, and hacked the institutional power of the Vatican.
They dominated Italian geopolitics and global diplomacy under Alexander, shifted to brutal Machiavellian military conquests under Caesar, and then collapsed almost overnight due to a single disastrous political bet on an enemy they thought they could control.
They birthed a legendary, terrifying villain in Cesare, a resilient patron of the arts in Lucrezia, and a canonized Catholic saint in Francis.
Which brings me to a final, slightly provocative thought for you to consider as we wrap up this analysis. We naturally view the Borgias through a lens heavily clouded by the specific moral and spiritual expectations we place on the church. We judge them as failing holy men.
Sure, because of the titles.
But if we temporarily strip away the religious titles, if we stop looking at them as a pope and a cardinal, and instead view the Papal States purely as a secular nation competing in a deadly, cutthroat geopolitical game for survival, were the Borgias actually less violent and more effective than the secular kings of England and France at the exact same time?
Well, that's interesting.
The kings of Europe were slaughtering tens of thousands in dynastic wars. CR conquered the Romagna with targeted assassinations and psychological fear, arguably spilling far less blood than a traditional war. Is our collective memory of the Borgias as uniquely, monstrously evil just proof that when you fight the church's established elite and lose, they get to write your history forever?
Wow, that completely shifts the perspective. We started this deep dive looking at a broken X-ray of a family, trying to diagnose the disease of their ambition. But it turns out the machine taking the X-ray was rigged by their enemies from the very start. Thank you for joining us today. We've linked to all the sources we discussed, and there's so much more nuance to uncover about this era. Keep digging into the history, keep questioning the narratives you've been handed, and we'll talk to you soon.